Tonight's episode is brought to you by Jeremiah Johnson Brewing.
Thorny, as we venture into the R&R, two truths are consistent. We love our dear Montana state, and we love great beer. And you know who else feels the same? Jeremiah Johnson Brewing. Brewed in the heart of Montana in downtown Great Falls, Jeremiah Johnson takes Montana's finest ingredients to craft some of Montana's favorite beers. And now, Jeremiah Johnson's second tap room is open in downtown Coeur d'Alene. Their Citra IPA is probably one of my favorites. But we all know, Thorny, you're not the hop lover I am. You're more of a mountain man Scotch ale.
Well, Foley, I'm certainly not a mountain man, but you are right. I do love their Mountain Man Scotch Ale. But come game day, you and I are both cracking their Golden Bobcat Pale Ale. So when you're looking for a quality craft beer brewed with Montana roots, a relaxing tap room, or just a six-pack to take to your favorite Bobcat tailgate, Jeremiah Johnson delivers. Make your next beer a Jeremiah Johnson, and as always, go Cats.
I will say anything beats the throwback Montana uniforms. Those are easily the most disgusting uniforms, I think, in the sport of football.
You mean that like burnt copper garbage?
I don't even know if I'd call it burnt copper. It's like a mushy orange and brown.
That's vile.
Welcome, everybody, to the R&R Catcast, a fan-based podcast focusing on Montana State athletics. We're two dudes named Ryan from the state of Washington talking about our dear Montana State. We hope you enjoy it. Welcome back, Bobcat fans. Well, thanks for joining us during this summer's night. Thorny, how are you doing today, buddy?
You know, I'm doing pretty good. It's been a good Wednesday for me, hump day. I have Friday off, so I'm looking forward to tomorrow being my Friday. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I've been excited to get on with you tonight, and we have a special episode coming up.
Yeah, I'm going to try something a little different tonight. I had the idea. Maybe I had a beer in me at the time. We'll leave that up to the scholars to decide. But we got two guests on. We got Joe DeLeone and Sean Anderson from the BLEAV Sports Network. I believe they have their podcast. Is it just called FCS Football Podcast?
Yeah, it's the BLEAV in FCS Football Podcast.
And then it's BLEAV spelled BLEAV.
Yes.
Not BLEAV.
Yeah, we'll ask you a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But you guys are both Rhode Island football players, Rhode Island Rams, just recently graduated. And we're going to ask you guys a little bit about the Bobcats, a little bit about what's going on in the FCS, maybe some COVID news, all that good fun stuff. But very first, let's start with what we normally do. Ryan, sorry, kind of hijacked it, just went with it. You can go first, Foley. What do you got in your golden coolie?
In my golden coolie, thanks for pointing that out, Thorny. We can't say koozie anymore. It's one of those trademark words.
Yeah, it's trademark. We're gonna go ahead and switch that to coolie now, which just doesn't have the same ring to it. Yes.
Yeah.
There's no way. Who
Bic.
filed that? Did
Bic Razors, yeah.
Bic Razors has the term koozie under lock.
Well, they have a whole
Really?
they have a whole product line of official like koozies. Like there's a branded koozie, and
The same Bic that makes the pens, the crappy $1 pens.
Yep.
Oh,
The things you learn when you start to monetize your podcast, right?
right.
We'll send you some golden coolies in the mail coming up this week. But first,
much
what's in mind?
appreciated.
Yeah, man, they're quite the item, the hot thing for R&R Cat. Anyways, we'll get to I'm called the IPA from O'Fallon Brewing Company, and that's out of St. Louis, Missouri.
How'd you get a Missouri beer way up here?
I'm glad you asked. Well, I helped my buddy get a job in a middle school just recently, and kind of gave him some advice and an end into the position. And to thank me, he ordered me 12 beers that just showed up on my doorstep. And it's like this beer company, and they pick random beers across the United States. And so I got a 12-pack of some stuff from St. Louis and I believe Wisconsin. So I'm drinking O'Fallon 5-Day IPA.
How is it?
Very generic IPA. It's all right, though. It's going down.
They all do the same thing in the end.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I got one of your favorites. I got the Sierra Nevada Pale. I was Target night. Pretty excited to pick up here. Like, I always fail that. And yeah, I'm enjoying it. It's quite delicious. No complaints here.
Attaboy.
How about you, Joe? What do you got over there?
I wish I had as an elaborate of a story behind mine and something unique, but I'm actually drinking a White Claw. I was previously, actually, I'm still fat, so I'm trying to cut down on anything that's heavy in calories. I kind of been following a trend with Sean here, drinking a lot of seltzers. So White Claw is easily one of the best ones out there. I'm drinking the raspberry flavored one.
Nice. No
Dorney,
complaints.
have you had a White Claw before?
Of course, yeah. I've had White Claws.
I've never had
Very
a White Claw.
refreshing. You haven't?
No.
No, he doesn't like lawlessness.
There's no laws. Right on.
How about you, Sean?
You know, Joe tried to throw me under the bus with the seltzer cabal, but I'm not going to fall there. I'm drinking a Bud Light Platinum, so not just the regular Bud Light, which my on deck drink, as you guys referred to it as, but the Platinum out of the beautiful blue bottle.
Nice. No complaints there either. That's always a solid choice. I like Bud Light. I like pretty much every beer in the market, really. But when for the show, we try and do something fancier a little bit. But also, a lot of times, I know that we drink Miller Lite and Coors Light. So,
Hold on. I want to know what differentiates a Budweiser from a Bud Light Platinum.
Bud Light Platinum 6%, Budweiser 5%. Obviously, they're all owned by Anheuser-Busch.
There you go.
But Budweiser is marked standard. If how all these Bona has extra light, Miller High Life, Budweiser. They had the Bud last year. I did a collaboration with Jim Beam last summer. Those tasted like soy sauce. But Bud Light is just a standard 4.1% alcohol percentage, and the Bud Light Platinum is 6%.
so it's just like a
That's
premium
great
version with
answer.
a little bit more alcohol, but not necessarily malt liquor territory. Where is it?
Right? No,
Not like Steel Reserve.
Somehow they. Right, not still. No.
Yeah, so just today, a big news story that came out was the Ivy League postponing all fall sports, maybe indefinitely for the year. So we were going to just put that on the plate and talk about like what that might look for the other conferences as well, and the Power Five and the trickle down effect to even smaller FBS programs and how that would then trickle into the FCS.
Sounds good. Why don't we start with our guest here, Sean? What did you think about this announcement? And was it that they were postponed, or was the Ivy League actually straight up canceled the fall classes with the potential they could be moved to spring? I guess maybe
it was a cancellation with the potential. I think obviously if some miracle were to happen, they could always try to reverse it, set it up later. But the real trick here is that Harvard, and there was another one, I think it was either Yale or Princeton, they're sending freshmen and juniors to campus for the fall semesters, and then sophomores and seniors to campus for the spring semesters. So if they continue with that plan of action, no matter which way you look at it, it's not just the fall sports that are getting cut. It's the spring sports also. So that just doesn't it'll set up the Ivies for, you can't play say softball in the spring and only have sophomores and seniors there on the team. So it does not look necessarily good as the outcome is of the Ivies. But I also know that Joe has a little more information on some of the other smaller conference FCS schools.
Yeah, I think that the and I tweeted this earlier today. I think that this Ivy League decision to cancel, postpone, whatever it is a really significant domino. Some people might just think that, oh, it's one small conference, shoot lots of places wide, and then at the FCS saying, well, the Ivy League, maybe we should consider doing it as well. We would look bad if other conferences are following suit and we don't make the same decision. All it takes is one team to do it, and then enough teams could possibly follow. I would not be surprised at all if we end up with FCS getting moved to the spring, or some type of a situation where there is no FCS season and some of the top players are granted some form of transfer waiver so they can go play for bigger programs. there's too much uncertainty right now, but I can tell you right now, this Ivy League conference cancellation for football and fall sports is a lot more some people admit.
I'm not so. I kind of wavered before it. Ivy League operates an FCS vacuum. They're their own little entity. They don't participate in the playoffs, and obviously they just kind of view football a little bit differently there. Even though they have some very quality teams and players for sure, they just kind of do their own thing. So I don't know if this is necessarily going to be like it was for the conference tournaments for the NCAA basketball, where one conference started it and like, oh well, everyone else do it. There's more known about it right now. Back then, I think there's a factor that everyone's cancel, and I don't think the Ivy really has that driving prestige factor, that the influence over the FCS landscape that maybe some of the other, like if some of the big basketball tournaments started canceling each other, like, well, the Big Sky Conference, of course they're going to cancel it. The big guys are doing it, but the Big Sky Conference is a much bigger, more prominent conference than the Ivy League. So, I just don't know how that's going to work, but I could totally see both sides of it. It makes me nervous one way or the other. That it's just, it's all bad signs. There's no way to spin it positively. I just don't know how big of impact it'll have.
And the thing though, with what's happening now, the reasoning's different. I understand where you're coming from, but the reasoning now is not for protective reasons and trying to keep players safe. We know the precautions necessary to do so, but the problem is the financial impact is significant. To do all that testing, get masks, the necessary precautions for travel, it would be too much financial strain on a conference like the Ivy Leagues that is still relatively small, but compared to some of these other FCS conferences like the Pioneer League or the NEC, I would argue the Ivy League probably has better financial standing than some of those tiny conferences. So conferences like that really can't afford to handle the structure needed for a successful season to occur. I think that there would be at least a handful of conferences that try to cancel, and I think pretty much every conference right now is weighing their options and if they can even afford to do this upcoming year.
Who else has started canceling games? It was is it Fordham that I saw canceling some games?
Fordham canceled the Hawaii game, and that game that makes sense because you have to fly all the way to Hawaii from New York City. I think that's just trying to alleviate a long trip. Realistically, you can make this work if you stick to the games where you only have to travel by bus that are in close proximity to your main campus. So that the Hawaii game dropping is not that surprising to me.
Well, Joe, what about bus trips from Kingston, Rhode Island down to Towson, Maryland? Are those still doable?
I guess they're still doable, even though it was 7 hours.
What a nightmare.
Yeah.
Fun little side story on that. A little funny story about Portland State. I don't know if you've listened to anything about their head coach, Bruce Barnum, probably one of the funniest guys you'll ever listen to. His first year taking over the team as interim head coach, he decided, we're bussing everywhere because we're going to build team chemistry from Portland all the way down to Ogden, Portland all the way over to like Missoula, Portland and everywhere. Bus. So can you imagine?
Is this a league of their own?
That's not team chemistry. You hate everyone on the bus when you're on the bus for that long. Sean knows. I almost came to blows with people who were putting their feet near me and kicking back their chairs too much. There is no team chemistry being built from that.
That was the weird year that Portland State caught lightning in a bottle, went 9-2, and made it to the playoffs, though. So
that was not because of the bus rides.
There's no way in hell that's because of the bus ride. You developed such a strong resentment for your brother next to you, and for the long bus rides, thank goodness, they allowed the offensive linemen 2 seats per person, which I was very grateful for. But even if we were going 3 hours, it's a nightmare, and you're just sleeping on the guy next to you. And all the skill players are so uppity. They're like, I'm not going to sit next to a lineman. So now it's lineman next to lineman on the buses. Yeah. And you just cannot believe that this happened. You get on the
bus slow.
I'm just begging for one of our 5'8", 170-pound receivers, please sit next to me. And who do I end up next to? One of them 300-pound, and a tie the top. Just no more. No.
So a couple of things here. Foley, I want to get your last parting thought before we move on from the COVID stuff, and then I actually want to get into who exactly Joe and Sean are, because we haven't properly introduced them yet. So everyone's listening is like, what are these guys talking about? We need to get part of it. We just as in the show don't always get to what we're talking about. So introduce Foley. Got any parting thoughts on the COVID situation in the Ivy Leagues?
Yeah, it's just I read an article from Colton Poole from the Bozeman Daily Chronicle today, and he was outlining the Big Sky Commissioner Tom Wistrcill's thoughts on just this, what we're talking about right now. And I got to believe all these commissioners across the United States right now are just sitting in probably some tension going, okay, look what the Ivy League did. Who's next? And if we look at this as kind of like this domino effect, and that's kind of what it felt like in March, right? When everything was like, okay, well, this was canceled. Okay, these guys, it's kind of next. Beyond Costello's echoing those same sentiments. They went from like interviews, a month ago saying we're 100% sure we're going to be playing football to now coming out saying, nope, we're like 50-50 right now. So I think everybody's just in this holding pattern. And now essentially the Ivy League took the first swing, and what's going to happen thereafter, I really don't know. So I don't have a positive feeling on it. I think it's going to be something that we as fans don't really like, but that's just how I feel.
One thing I didn't read the article, but I think I gleaned a tweet from maybe Colton or Paul Schwedelson that MSU has stopped the voluntary football workouts currently. Was that in the article?
No, I did not read that.
I thought I read that currently, like, they've kind of stopped the voluntary workouts, which is not a positive sign in itself.
No.
All right. Well, that was a fun discussion about virus and canceling football. Let's get into some other fun stuff. First of all, I want to probably fully introduce our guests. So you heard them talking a little bit about bus rides and being on the football team. So I'm sure you kind of gathered that. We did mention in the beginning that they played for Rhode Island, but why don't you guys tell us a little bit more about what it is that you guys do and your college experience, maybe playing for Rhode Island, just kind of a general broad, what was it like playing for an FCS program, and how did that shape just your opinion of the FCS, and maybe transition into why are you podcasting about the FCS? Very loaded question, very long question. We're pretty bad at interviews. Why don't you go first, Joe? Why don't you tackle that massive question?
I think you guys should give yourselves more credit than you're giving yourselves. I'm having a lot of fun here. There's not a lot of shows that I can go on and announce that I'm drinking alcohol while I'm doing it. I've done radio appearances. I can't exactly do that on a radio appearance, but
we hope if everyone has a few drinks, then it makes it, they don't critique us too much.
It's a good philosophy.
It's a comedy club tactic.
So my experience playing at the FCS level, playing at URI, I played for 4 seasons, technically 3.5 because I didn't step in until halfway through my freshman year. Was on scholarship for 2 of those ends, and they played pursuing an opportunity to keep playing, have an agent, all that good stuff. But waiting on an opportunity. A lot of guys that went unsigned were relying on rookie mini camps, but lost out on any chances to do so because of COVID and what's going on right now. In terms of the reasoning why we kind of got into this, Sean and I had started doing our own audio work together. We were practicing and learning. We were roommates. Our sophomore year, we started doing our own stuff. We took classes together that were audio related, and we were just trying to find ways to break into the media sphere in a professional sense. The way that we did that was reaching out to BLEAV. When they first started, they were hiring. They were looking for former athletes of notable levels. There's a lot of big name guys that are currently with the network, and it's honestly so amazing to say that we are a part of this network as that group of former athletes. And when we reached out to Braun at BLEAV, we had this dialogue and this conversation of how can we contribute, what ways can we put together a show, and the best way that we came about that was covering the entire FCS, having the ability to talk about all 132 teams or the 126 teams. Sean knows that number. All the teams at the FCS level.
I think it's 128 now.
128, Sean, you are right. But being able to talk about every single team, every single fan base, touch upon the big storylines, and be able to talk about the big major programs, as well as shine light on maybe some of the smaller ones that don't get as much notoriety.
It also definitely came as a plus that we played at that level. And playing at that level, we both had our ups and downs when it came to recruiting. And when Rhode Island came and visited me, I was super excited, but there were 2 other schools in Virginia that I definitely had my eyes on. And Rhode Island, they kept a spot open for me, which I was super appreciative of. And then we just did that path from there, and I started to realize and look around like, hey, this is real football. This is real football. My freshman year, it was no question that I was going to have to redshirt, and I redshirted and had to bulk up and put on weight and do the whole thing. And then you're just looking around and you see scouts at practice, and you're like, you start learning, and we start doing this FCS show, and you develop such an appreciation for FCS football, given the how big the chips are on the shoulders of the guys that play in it. And that's not excluding Joe and myself. FBS schools have turned down just about everybody in our locker room, and that doesn't go unnoticed or unremembered. So it was just an overall positive experience from us going through, at points, just turmoil, heartbreak in that recruiting process, and to turn it into something positive. And I'm just excited that we're giving back in some form of positivity towards the FCS community.
Kind of my impression of the FCS players has always kind of been, if you're playing in the FCS, you love football. I think that's just kind of what it boils down to. You're playing because you love to play.
I would say that that's a fair assumption, but at the same time, I think it's a lot of guys that not only love to play, but are talented enough to play, and just went a little bit unnoticed by some of these huge programs. Guys that maybe were dealing with academic issues and couldn't really stick at a program like Clemson or Notre Dame because of academic problems, or maybe something that a hurdle that they encountered and they needed to rely on. Yeah, the perfect example is a late bloomer. We had Jeremy Chin on the show, and when we talked to him and I had a conversation with him, I said, what do you think was the biggest reason why you chose an FCS school? And he told me when he was in high school, for a long period of time, he was barely 6 feet tall. And during this whole draft process, actually, he was like 5'9" or something his junior year. I forget what the exact number was. And the whole NFL draft process, everyone was talking about how he's so big and he can move for a guy that is 6'3" as a safety. So he hit a late growth spurt. Same thing with Adam Troutman, who came on the show as well. Guys just hit these late growth spurts, and they develop later than some other players, and they really get to take advantage of these FCS schools get to take advantage of those guys.
I think a pretty big name in that kind of category would be Dallas Goedert. He kind of was that just a scrawny high school kid from South Dakota, like 210, coming into
That's how it works. And then the major blue chip FBS schools, I mean, they're going after guys that are grown men by sophomore year of high school. It's just different. People develop differently, and the FCS is kind of that. I hate the term island of misfit toys, but island of misfit toys. And then you go and you find that this is an island full of gold.
There's some absolute talent at the level, whether it be, like you said, guys looking for second chances, or maybe just late bloomers, or just in Montana's case, you just got guys that are straight up dudes, but you're playing in Dillon, Montana. Like, who's going to come recruit Dillon, Montana? It's a town of like 2,000 people. And that's like Troy Anderson was a man coming out of high school. If he's anywhere else, that kid's going to FBS program for sure, but he's just small town Montana. I think that's one of the reasons the Montana schools continually have success, is because there's just that constant stream of small town talent in Montana that just no one's going to come recruit. I mean, you'll get on a big program. They're up like the Boise State's like receiving records coming from Helena, Montana, but small town Montana guys are just going to really help the programs, and that's just all part of it. And it's a fun part, and it's just a fun part of covering FCS and being a fan of FCS.
So Joe and Sean, I do have a question for you guys. As far as the FCS goes, how do you think the transfer portal is now affecting FCS football?
Good question.
I think that the transfer portal, some people kind of consider, if you're at the FCS, you're going to try and transfer at some point. I only see that for rare exceptions. Like Trey Lance, if he decides to stick around after this year and not declare for the draft, he's not going to end up going in the transfer portal because he's so talented. He's going to stick around and play till his senior year if he chooses to do so. Jabril Cox did it because he was, I believe, a redshirt junior, and he knew that instead of staying at North Dakota State where he'd get the same level of exposure, still probably would have been a first-round pick, he can go play for LSU and get a little bit of extra opportunities to get noticed, play against bigger competition, all that good stuff. I don't think we're going to see a ton of guys doing it. It's kind of a rare exception. Guys think that they're better than they are in some cases, and maybe they transfer to an FBS program, but a really small one. It's just an added complication to college football recruiting. As many guys that are going to move up, there's going to be tons of talented dudes that say, oh, I'm sick of playing at this FBS program that I'm at. I'm not getting the touches that I want. Think that they're going to go to another big program and then end up having to move down to FCS. There's going to be just a swapping of talent levels from both ends.
You see, Joe, I almost have to contrast you because I've seen pretty positive influence of that transfer portal, and no one's got the wool over their eyes enough to say, "Oh, you're going to get the same exposure in the CAA as you would in the Big Ten or SEC." Whereas in the offensive line room that I was in year before I came in, Tyler Catalina, 4-year starter, transferred to Georgia. Second year I was there, David Steinmetz, 3-year starter, transferred to Purdue. Next year, Dino Boyd, all 3 offensive tackles, transfer to Cincinnati. All 3 have been on NFL rosters. Dave is still on with the Texans. Tyler Dino is with the Bears right now, and then I know Tyler spent plenty of time with the Redskins and the Vikings, and I think he's either floating around Canada, or I actually think he got picked up by somebody else. I can't remember, but those guys were awarded that opportunity to play against the top touted edge rushers in the nation, and that's something, at least from an offensive lineman standpoint, you can't overlook. No matter how good the pass rushers are in the FCS, the FBS pass rushers are just the most extreme athletes that you're going to face. So if you can hold your own against them, you're going to have a infinitely better shot of getting seen. If you can't hold your own against them, that's tough luck. But regardless, I've seen, at least in my room, the positives that was brought about the transfer portal.
It's just interesting because it can go both ways. Like you said, like some guys might think they're better than they are. Kind of an example, I guess, a little bit from the Big Sky Conference was Gage Gubrud over at Eastern Washington. Was breaking all sorts of Eastern Washington records, which is a pretty impressive place to break records. Decided to try his hand, transferred over to Wazoo for grad transfer for senior season, and did not win the starting job. And they ended his senior season just sitting on the bench, and I don't even know if he got a snap in. Instead of coming back for his senior year and potentially taking Eastern to a national championship, he went on and didn't even get any playing time. And I feel bad for the kid, but I mean, he took a shot, and that's what happens. So you just gotta weigh your options carefully. I have no idea. Another case that just came up, Kevin Thompson. I have no idea if he's going to win a starting job at UW. He's certainly got an opportunity. They don't have much returning, but again, man, there's a lot of talent on those rosters, young talent, and I would hate to see a guy like Kevin Thompson, who took Sac State, took their first playoff appearance in forever, if not ever. Yeah, first playoff appearance ever.
Yeah.
And he takes a chance, first chance he gets back to hometown area, and I get all that. It just makes me kind of sad a little bit as a fan of the Big Sky Conference and seeing programs like that on the rise. And is he going to even have an opportunity to play? We'll see. But so it just goes both ways. All right, well, let's move on to maybe some Montana State football talk. You guys up for that?
Yeah,
Definitely.
of course.
All right. So, Sean, what did you think? First of all, I just want to ask you a little bit about the 2019 Bobcats that reached the semifinal for the first time in 35 years, all that good stuff. What did you think of the 2019 Bobcat squad?
2 words: exceeded expectations. Obviously, we're still, I call us still novices to the FCS landscape. But going into the season, it was definitely, we knew about Montana. We knew about the powerhouses in the Big Sky. And Montana State, it was, it seemed like maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they wouldn't. And them destroying Albany in the was just major shit. And getting also steam was just hell. But they draw face North State. That's it. But they weren't fault on time. North Dakota last year into tough, high-ranking matchups, but they also beat in the regular season Cal Poly. It's obviously Cal Poly wasn't the Cal Poly that we were expecting, but at the same time, they just continuously, it was a roller coaster, but I'd say most of the time it was a positive trending roller coaster.
I'd also say that the Montana State football team from 2019 was such a good defensive unit. You got Bryce Stirk, who I feel was not the leader, but the best player representing that team. They were so driven by defensive performances, being able to slow down some quality offenses throughout the year. I think that the fact that they're losing a lot of guys like Bryce Stirk, and then also the fact that you're not getting back Troy Anderson, there's just a lot of players that were top returners on that defense that are not coming back, which kind of draws some concern for me when talking about next season leading into 2020.
I mean, DB depth alone, they're losing 3 corners and 1 safety, and Damian Washington, Greg Filer, and JoJo Henderson, and then Braden Conkle at safety. I mean, this is just, you can never get enough DB depth, but at the same time, you can never get enough senior DB depth.
So Greg Filer actually is coming back. He was
is he really?
Yeah, he was a senior preseason all-conference guy. I think he played fully, want to say like 2 games this year.
Yeah, he came back for about 2. That's right.
He was injured most of the year, so he was able to redshirt, I believe, because he had not redshirted yet anywhere. But regardless, he's coming back, so that's pretty exciting because he's considered, I think he's one of the better lockdown corners. Like man-to-man press coverage beats you up. He's like 6'1", 180, 190, pretty tall, lanky guy. So pretty excited to have him back. But yeah, you're right. The safeties are the biggest concern between JoJo Henderson, who was the 3rd guy but played a ton and was probably a starter on half the FCS schools in the country. And then we got Braden Conkle and then Jacque Allen. Like those are going to be the hard ones to replace.
Absolutely. You mentioned, I just kind of curious, what was the East Coast take on Albany?
They also out of nowhere. Joe, I'll let you take this one, but go ahead.
I was very out of nowhere because the previous seasons playing against Albany, it was the constant bottom feeder in the CAA. We were bad, but we were always like good enough to beat them. Yeah, this is coming from one of the worst teams in the CAA. We were always capable of beating them for a couple of years, and then this past year we go and play them towards the middle of the season, and they completely dismantled us. Their running game with Carl Mofer, and then an elite quarterback with Jeff Undercuffler, who was a freshman last year. So unexpected. They hit the ground running at the very second stretch of the season. I would argue their win over us was part of the ignition to their momentum. It's not like I'm trying to give us some credit for why they did so well, but
dude,
we were the springboard, no big deal.
Exactly. They finished so strong.
I would give us more credit because the year before, our junior year, we beat them like 48-7.
Yeah, we kicked the crap out of them.
We crushed them, and then we're like, oh, Albany's going to be the doormat now. And then 2019 happens, we're like, oh,
we're still the doormat.
We're just looking for someone else to take the reins, and it's just suck.
I did have some historical stats on Rhode Island I wasn't gonna mention necessarily. Just
just hurt our feelings. Just get
now you brought it up. I mean,
I gotta hear them.
If it's something I haven't heard, I'm gonna be disappointed.
I don't think it's anything you haven't heard. I think I just read that there's been 4 winning seasons since '85.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
we were part of one of them.
There you go. There you go.
That's all that matters to me.
I did have a trivia question for you though. Who was the last team the Bobcats beat in a semifinal game? You probably know the answer.
It was Rhode Island. Yeah, I know. I remember seeing footage of that game. Our head coach, Jim Fleming, was it him, Sean, or was it the group of alumni that pulled up a YouTube clip from that game when
Donnie.
They played it was probably Donnie, who was our quality control coach. They pulled up a clip of that MSU Rhode Island game back in the 80s. That was when I remember seeing all those obnoxious plays like the interception. But that was when Rhode Island rocked the yellow in the uniform. I wish they would bring it back.
Just at least a little tease of it. I don't need the whole blue and yellow. I just need one tease uniform.
Yeah.
The Cats have kind of brought back those uniforms, the '84 championship, because that was the year we won the national championship. So that was like bring back those throwback uniforms from time to time, and they're pretty cool to see them like in like high definition or live in person. They're pretty sharp. Just that kind of old school, bright yellow old Chargers kind of colors almost a little bit.
So
fellas, I do like those. I'm looking at them right now. I'm sorry, Ryan. I didn't mean to step on you. I like the blue and the royal blue and the yellow.
Yeah, you'll have to look at
fantastic.
What year was that fully that we did the throwbacks? It was Dakota Prukop, so 2014?
Yeah, somewhere in the teens. Yeah, we had it. Well, we did it twice, actually. We did it with Kramer as well. But that was with Dixie State came in and
Oh, it's Chadron.
Woodhead.
It was stupid
Or
Danny
Chadron,
Woodhead.
Yeah, Danny Woodhead ran wild all over us.
I've never heard hate for Danny Woodhead like that.
Oh man, he came in and ran for like 273 yards. The next week,
my God.
after we had beaten Colorado, the Buffs down in Boulder, we come back and just lose to Danny Woodhead.
Yeah, it was horrible.
I will say
fantastic.
anything beats the throwback Montana uniforms. Those are easily the most disgusting uniforms, I think, in the sport of football.
You mean that like burnt copper garbage?
It's I don't even know if I'd call it burnt copper. It's like a mushy orange and
Oh,
brown.
that's vile.
That's
yeah.
that's
a
very.
gross
We appreciate
uniform.
this kind of banter here because those are ugly. And I'm
It's
glad
like a
you guys
liquid that
agree.
would drip out of your car. Oh, that is disgusting.
I just found our intro to this episode, gentlemen.
Yeah, I was just about to say that's our outro.
And they're
Perfect.
fan right away.
So, Thorny, I do want to kind of build off a question that we were just asked. We were talking about the playoffs with Albany. So you guys see Albany come into Bobcat Stadium. Bobcats take care of business. Austin P comes in the next week. And you guys get to see Montana State from the distance, from ESPN, the crowd. What do you guys think when you see Montana State in the atmosphere that we have?
So it's interesting that you kind of hinted on the Albany game and seeing Montana State play Albany. I could tell immediately at the beginning of that game that they were in very foreign territory, that they had to travel all the way to Montana in a stadium packed with rabid fans. I knew that environment is not an environment that you want to face on the road, especially in the playoffs. It just seems like I wouldn't really expect, because I didn't watch a lot of live Montana State games because we were playing on Saturdays. But
Yeah.
I can just tell that Montana State fans are so passionate about their team, because there's no other college football programs besides Montana in the state. There's no FBS programs to root for. These are your programs. So you guys are all in on the Montana State program.
There's something about the people from the Badlands and in the Midwest that just don't care about the cold. Sometimes on the East Coast, people get a little chilly. They don't turn out to games as much. Whereas out there, I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is freezing cold. I don't even think if I was a Montana State fan, I'd be out there. I'm just not built like that. But you guys, you guys turned out. It was an awesome atmosphere to see. I'm like, this is college football right here. This is awesome.
Yeah.
It's
I love
kind of.
the
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I just love when we get into the playoff system and they're allowed to have these night games in late November, early December.
Yeah.
There's just something like magical when you see an ESPN crew come to your campus and they normally are not there, and just the lights come on and the energy is just palpable, and it's just fun to watch, regardless if you've been there or if you're all the way across the nation in Rhode Island. So it's just pretty cool.
Well, night games in November, December, definitely cold, but night games mean you've also been pre-gaming for a long time, gentlemen.
Well, I was thinking about that
You're
today,
feeling a little bit
Thorny, too.
warmer.
Like, if we move football to the spring, and let's say we're starting February, first game in February.
It's going to be ugly, man. It's going to be snowing. It'll be snowing.
Yeah, I mean, Montana State has canceled spring football in a couple seasons now. I know that's not true, but our coach is famously not in favor of spring football.
Yeah, he's not a
because,
fan.
Our seasons in Montana State, in Montana,
Yeah,
are
because it's
basically
probably not even spring football. It's probably winter football during the
Yeah,
spring.
Exactly. So you guys get it. There it is.
One last thing on, I just wanted to say on the Albany thing, where we're still kind of talking a little bit about it. I remember watching their game against, was it Central Connecticut State University?
Yes.
That's who it was.
Yep.
CCSU. Just watching them like hit those slant patterns. They just kept hitting over the middle and taking to the house. I'm starting to watch it like, they're not going to do that against the Bobcats. They're just not going to do that. Our defense was locking down. So I'm glad you asked that question, Foley, because I had really I didn't know anything about Albany except for watching briefly their game and a little bit statistics of Jeff Undercuffler. But I'm glad you asked them, a team that may have seen them, is familiar with them, what they thought of them. So that was a good question. And that was a fun game to watch us just kind of just slowly clamp down on Albany and just squeeze them the life out of them.
For sure.
Well, let's move on to the upcoming year. We mentioned all the losses. We kind of talked a lot about them. Do you think MSU is now kind of a program that you see those kind of losses and you think like, well, Montana State just reloads. That's just what they do. Or are the Cats just not quite to that level yet? Just kind of what do you think of something like that? Maybe Sean, what do you think?
Reloading is in roster talent and recruiting.
Yeah, like we have all these key losses like Bryce Stirk and Jacques Wayall on the back end. Like, is that, do you know, like you just kind of trust that MSU's at that kind of level where you don't worry about it, or are those still concerns?
Good programs find a way to recruit good players, and Montana State has a good reputation, and they have a good foundation, and they get to say, hey, man, especially this year, we're playing at Utah this year. You get to play in front of 50,000 people out there, and that's something that catches the eye of FCS level prospects. Something that says, hey, we'll get to play. We'll play Cal Poly, we'll play Weber State, Montana, we'll do all this. But also, you're going to get some exposure. You come to us. It's not just going to be like your opener here against LIU. It's not just going to be that. You're going to get to play in front of crowds. You're going to be seen. You're going to see the track record that we have of producing quality athletes to be primed for the next level. I think that good programs like Montana State are going to be in good shape for recruiting for time to come.
I'm in the same boat that I know that Montana State is a good program. They recruited pretty well this year. The thing that does concern me, though, is that they have enough losses to maybe not significantly impact them, but to at least hinder them. I already mentioned all the defensive players. We already kind of combed over that. But a lot of the top returning receivers and your top rusher are no longer on the team. Isaiah Fonzie is returning. I'm a big fan of Fonzie and what he's capable of doing as a running back. I'm confident that he can be your RB1 and be very productive. But, Coy Steele, who had 334 yards last year, is your most leading receiver coming back. And Tucker Rovig didn't exactly torch defenses with the receiving group you had last year. So I don't know if Rovig is going to be able to handle a new group of receivers unless you have some type of a wild card that we're not really aware of that hasn't really shown himself yet. I think Rovig does not have the supporting cast, I think, to throw for more than 150 yards per game, which is what he averaged last year.
See, I find that hard to kind of believe a little bit because we're such a run-first team that we haven't really tested or had to rely upon our receivers. And so one of our questions was, and you're just hitting on it right now, is like, what are your impressions of Rovig? And he's kind of a polarizing quarterback for the Bobcats. A lot of us, are in his camp, and then a lot of them are out of the camp. And then Montana State brings in transfer from North Carolina State, Matt McKay. We get a new offensive coordinator, Justin Udy, out of Texas Tech. And so without even seeing anybody in spring ball, this is a huge question mark. For me personally, like Tucker Rovig, I'm kind of in his camp. Like, I think he's a guy that, like I was listening to your old episode, and I think you guys said it just as well, is if he plays this year, he's not going to do any worse than he did last year. And he consistently got better throughout the year. This year, specifically when he got into the playoffs in November, he did phenomenal. But he didn't do phenomenal in the way that you're like, wow, he was really leading the team to wins. He was just really managing the game well. And then he was making some throws where like, okay, that's an improvement. So is he able to take the next step? Is MSU going to ask him to take the next step? That's the biggest question I have. And then juxtapose that with, okay, this Matt McKay guy coming in, has maybe a different skill set, kind of more of a runner, but also a passer. So there's just question marks all over for Montana State. But when you're looking at Tucker Rovig, I think if MSU sticks with him, they're not going to be any worse for the wear. And I would, if he's our QB1 going into fall camp or going into the season, I'd be completely comfortable with him.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say that you made a good point about how this Montana State team was very run first. You didn't need to throw for more than 150 yards because you had a two-back tandem that was so productive last year. You lose one of those guys. Fonzie is the top guy returning. You can rely on a Fonzie to exceed that 800 yards that he rushed for last year. I think whoever you have under center just needs to manage the game like you talked about. I don't think that this Montana State offense is a stretch the field. And you mentioned there's a new offensive coordinator. I can't imagine that they will be trying to stretch the field and beat teams over the top. It is going to be a lot of pound the rock, run the ball on first and second down, move the ball in an old-fashioned, effective two tight end type way before you decide to stretch the field with Tucker Rovig. He's just not that type of a quarterback. And some of the other guy from NC State that's coming in, I don't really know what he is going to bring to the table. I would assume that Rovig would probably have the highest advantage because he's the returning starter.
Yeah, I wouldn't put too much stock into the FBS transfers. I've seen people get all hot in the britches because they say they got an FBS transfer. They start talking a lot, and then he gets there, and it just doesn't pan out exactly as you hoped he was. You know, you expect them to be NC State. You're expecting them to be the next Phillip Rivers, but odds are he's not going to be. And FCS, you don't necessarily need a Phillip Rivers. You need a guy that can go into the playoffs and win a couple games, and that's what I see from Rovig. He won a couple games last year. That's a huge plus for me. He's got experience in game, and he's also got experience in playoff games, and that's you can't replace that with anything.
Well, let me ask you this. So the Rovig led the team all the way to the semifinals. Do you think Rovig is capable of leading to the Bobcats to a national championship?
I think that leans on the defense. This team obviously runs through the defense in the run game. So I don't think it'll ever, maybe until junior, senior year, until he's really starting to come into his own as a quarterback and finds his quarterback identity, it will be him leading the team. I think it's always going to be defensive centric there at Montana State.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Sean. I don't think that Rovig is the type of player that is going to lead you to a championship. I think that the run game, the defense is going to be your primary identity, and Rovig will be essentially trying not to lose you the games. I know that sounds very negative. It's not going to be his mentality, but you just need him to do enough to progress the offense forward. It's kind of like Joe Flacco when the Ravens won the Super Bowl back in 2012. They had such a good defensive unit. I believe Ray Rice was still on the team. They ran the ball so well, but you knew that Joe Flacco wasn't going to kill you. You know he wasn't going to beat you deep. You know he wasn't going to be a defining factor. He still won the MVP in that game. I think a lot of people would argue he wasn't the most worthy of winning the MVP in that game, but it was a matter of what led them down that path that season was the defense and was the running game.
I was going to say either early 2010 Seahawks or the recent 49ers. You know, it's not a bad thing to have a defense leading a team. It sends a message of, hey, we're going to punch you in the mouth. And I think that's what Montana State prides itself on.
The Cats were so good defensively down the stretch. Like, I remember we were kind of calculating some manual stats, like just how, like, the few touchdowns, like they gave up like 4 touchdowns over a stretch of like 6 games, and one of them was on a trick play, and like there was just some like a couple of asterisks you could even put on the few touchdowns they did give up. So the Cats are definitely defense first team with Jeff Choate, or run first team with Jeff Choate. The thing we question a lot on this podcast is, does Jeff Choate have any idea what he's doing with the quarterbacks? It's every single year it's always a controversy. It's always a discussion topic. We're kind of tired of talking about it. I mean, we had Troy Anderson playing quarterback for a whole year. Just crazy single wing offense in 2018. Made the playoffs. So yeah, what are you gonna do? But it's interesting to see what the Cats have done, being a defensive first team and just kind of having an explosive running game. Like you're talking about, you did mention that the Cats are explosive running the ball. The Cats, in a league with a triple option team, led the league in rushing yards per game and rushing average per carry, and also touchdowns by a mile. 44 touchdowns on the ground. So it's like you can be explosive in a running team, and the Cats are certainly that. But you still have to have the quarterback who can keep the defenses a little honest. They can't just stuff every guy in the box every time. So it's interesting to see the progression there, and I don't know how Matt McKay is going to factor into that. But question I have, I guess, for you is, I guess we kind of asked that a little bit. Are the Cats a quarterback away from the national championship then, or do you think, like you said, Tucker Rova can probably get us there, just being a defensive-minded team?
I wouldn't. I don't think that this team is a quarterback away. I think, like you said, it is going to pride itself on being defensive minded, being effective in the running game. If you can hit an absolute home run in recruiting, or maybe the NC State transfer that that we've alluded to previously, maybe if he ends up being a home run, that will put you over the hurdle. But I don't think that this Montana State team desperately needs that. The biggest issue, and I know it's hard to say for a lot of programs and fan bases, it's not a matter of if you're good enough. It's a matter of if you're better than North Dakota State to win a national championship right now.
It's true.
Because you could be like JMU and have an extremely complete program, and you're still facing off against a mid-tier FBS program in the national championship. JMU had so many things going for them. A quarterback that got drafted. They had so many defensive players that are going to be playing in the NFL. They have guys that are returning that are going to be playing in the NFL. Their offensive line is loaded, and they still couldn't beat Trey Lance in North Dakota State. As long as Trey Lance is still there, and as long as the talented unit that they have in whole is still there for the next few seasons, you're not going to win the national championship, or at least it's going to be very, very difficult to do so.
No, it's if there was one year that North Dakota State wasn't supposed to be as dominant as they were, it's supposed to be this year with a new quarterback, a new coaching staff, and a whole bunch of new players. But
exactly, yeah.
Instead,
who would have thought Trey Lance would have come out of the ground like he did?
Instead, it's just like, all right, well, I guess they're winning in the next 4, so next 3 now, but
possibly next 1 if Trey Lance declares, which a lot of people think he's going to.
All right, so we just got 2 final questions here. Don't want to take too much more of your time up here. Kind of bigger questions. We've kind of alluded to some of them, so maybe you've already answered them and you just kind of want to reiterate it. But Sean, we'll start with you. What's the Bobcats' biggest strength and weakness heading in to this year?
Strength, I sound like a broken record. It's their defense, and then also their coaching on the defensive side. Their biggest weakness, and Joe already said it would be the receiving group. I mean, you lose key guys, and then you have to replace them. But also college, you find wide receivers in the rough. You find them all the time. And then there's also wide receivers just waiting in the wings. So I wouldn't even, if anybody's going after the concern of a running back or replacing the running back, I feel like college running backs are even more a dime a dozen than NFL running backs, just because everyone can tote the rock. It just depends on if you don't put it on the ground. So strength definitely on the defensive side, and home field advantage in for the Bobcats. And then weaknesses, I'd probably say the coming back, returning with a new wide receiver group.
I'm going to echo the sentiment that Sean has there, because it's the same stuff that we just talked about for the past 20 or so minutes. Defense is a huge strength. You're losing some key players, but it's a well-coached team. It is always going to be the focus, the identity, the goal to be the best unit on that squad. As I said earlier, this receiver group, the fact that you're losing your top 2 receivers, and now you have a guy that only had 300 receiving yards last year with Coy Steele as your top returning receiver. Even if this is not a pass-first team, even if this isn't a team that threw the ball as often as some other programs, it's concerning to me that when you need to pick up yardage through the air, or you need a change of pace, are you going to be able to do that with a group that is going to be very inexperienced?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern. I think you hit something that we haven't really talked about too much. Like, if you need that 3rd and 15, can the Cats convert with Tucker Rovig and then a new cast of wide receivers? Like, that's a very good question. That's some every program in the country comes up against, are those kinds of moments where they need to convert. That's definitely something that we need to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, I think that's about all we have. This was a fun episode. It was kind of something different. Just bringing on 2 other guys who kind of podcast about the FCS landscape, just to see the outsiders' take, an East Coaster's take, even especially. I'm curious. One last question before I get you out of here. What is like MSU's like media presence? Like, are you able to watch film on anyone? One of my favorite things that you guys do, I love it when you guys break down some film, because I think you guys are very knowledgeable and it's very informative for me. But I've gone out there and I've tried to find like a highlight reel for some of our players, and a lot of times it just doesn't exist. So, are you able to really fully give a team like Montana State like the attention that they might warrant?
It requires a lot of digging, a lot of looking up on YouTube. Some of these games might not get put up right away, but people will upload full games if you just straight up Google or search in YouTube Montana State football 2019. There will be at least a couple games. I also have a couple resources from other shows that I do. I produce another show with BLEAV and host covering the NFL draft, and one of the people that I work with has access to a ton of all 22 film from programs at pretty much every level. So I also have access to that. It's not easy, I will admit, but I am able to find something to watch.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get out of here. Sean, where can our listeners find you, and maybe your personal, and then maybe also what you do with BLEAV?
Yeah, my personal Twitter at Sanderson Radio, S Anderson Radio. Joe's Twitter, I'll just plug it for him. Joe DeLeone, spelled just how it sounds. And then you can find our show, BLEAV, BLEAV, in FCS football, basically on anywhere that you find podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. Art19 is our primary location, but we're everywhere. And then if you can't find it, just feel free to hit either of us up on Twitter. I'm going to go one more time for you. Sanderson Radio and at Joe DeLeone.
Fellas, it was awesome having you on. We appreciate your time, and we know it's really late for you, so double thanks on that, man.
Hey, no worries. Really appreciate you having us on. This was a ton of fun. It was something different, and if you guys ever want to have us on again, we are more than willing to come on.
Nice.
I appreciate it.
We would also like to reciprocate the offer. If you guys ever want to come on to our show, we would have no problem with that also. I think that's what Joe was looking for. Hey, I know we were great, so if you want us back, hey, go ahead and give us a call.
Well, if you ever need any sort of FCS MSU correspondence, correspondent, man, I am 2 beers in. Correspondent, either one of us would be happy to jump on the show.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, cat fans, you can find the R&R Catcast on Twitter, RR Catcast. You can find us on the Bobcat Nation under a recurring thread there. And Foley, let's just end this with a Go Cats.
Go Cats.
Go Cats.